Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The scorching sun of the African savanna stretched as far as the eye could see, illuminating a landscape both magnificent and unforgiving. In the distance, a hot wind carried the cries of wild animals, and the dust kicked up by footsteps echoed like a silent warning. In the midst of this immensity, a small, trembling figure clung to the few blades of grass, eyes wide open, staring at the horizon with incomprehension and fear. She was barely 7 years old. Her world was made up of sounds, gestures, and precise routines. Every change, every unexpected movement plunged her into an abyss of confusion. But nothing could have prepared her for what had just happened. Her own father, without a word of explanation, had left her alone in the heart of the savannah. He had left, disappearing like a shadow, leaving behind a fragile, vulnerable, and terrified child. The wind seemed to howl its distress, and even the birds, usually so noisy, had fallen silent. But just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a majestic movement caught her eye. A lion, imposing and calm, was advancing through the tall grass. The villagers always said that these creatures were merciless, but its eyes, a deep gold, reflected something unexpected. The lion didn't roar. He showed no intention of hunting. On the contrary, he approached the little girl slowly, as if guided by a protective instinct. The child backed away hesitantly, but the animal sat down beside her, his massive paws resting with surprising gentleness. And there, under the relentless sun, a silent bond formed between the autistic girl and the king of the savannah. He reassured her with his mere presence, as if he understood her fear better than any human. The villagers, who rushed over after hearing the child's desperate cries, couldn't believe their eyes. This lion, renowned for its ferocity, had chosen to protect an abandoned child rather than harm her. In this unexpected gesture lay a lesson deeper than any words. Sometimes, compassion is found where it is least expected. And on that day, the whole savannah seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to an act of tenderness that would forever mark those who witnessed it. The sun had barely risen over the savannah when Mia, a little 7-year-old girl with tousled hair and huge eyes, sensed that something was wrong. She had been awakened by the sharp sound of her father's boots on the dusty ground, but instead of taking her in his arms as he did every morning, he had looked at her coldly. "Stay here," he murmured, his voice hoarse and distant. Before she could ask a single question, he had vanished behind the tall grass, leaving behind an icy void and a dull fear. Mia didn't understand what was happening. The world around her, already complex because of her autism, had suddenly collapsed. Sounds jumbled together, shadows seemed to dance ominously, and her heart pounded in her chest. Alone in the vastness, she searched for a familiar presence. No familiar animal, no known face. Just the wind sweeping through the grass and the distant cry of a vulture. Her tears mingled with the dust, and she murmured incomprehensible words, syllables she repeated to reassure herself. As panic began to overwhelm her, a rustling in the tall grass caught her attention. She jumped, ready to scream, but the figure that emerged was not human. A majestic lion was approaching. Its golden fur shone in the morning sun, and its eyes, strangely gentle, gazed at Mia without any hint of threat. Instinct screamed at her to flee, but her body refused to move. The lion sat down a few feet away, as if to say, "I won't hurt you." Mia felt a strange warmth wash over her. For the first time since her father had abandoned her, she didn't feel alone. In the distance, the villagers, alerted by the unusual silence and Mia's desperate cries, rushed to her aid. But even before their arrival, a strange connection had formed between the little girl and the king of the savannah. This silent, fragile, and unexpected bond would become her only lifeline in a world that had just betrayed her. The villagers came running, breathless and worried. Among them were Thomas, the village chief, and his wife, Emily, who had known Mia well since her birth. When they saw the little girl alone in the tall grass, their hearts sank. But what stopped them in their tracks was the imposing presence of the lion, sitting calmly beside her, like a silent guardian. "Back off!" Thomas shouted, thinking the animal was going to attack. But the lion didn't move. He only raised his head, his golden eyes gazing at the little girl with surprising gentleness. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She never would have imagined that such a fearsome predator could act with such delicacy. Mia, for her part, felt reassured. The sudden movements and loud voices that would normally have triggered a panic attack seemed to have no effect compared to this majestic presence. The lion lowered his head and, with measured slowness, gently rubbed his cheek against the little girl's shoulder. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some thought it was a miracle, others couldn't believe their eyes. "He's protecting her," Emily whispered incredulously. Thomas, still wary, remained on his guard, but even he couldn't deny the scene unfolding before him. Then, in a gesture that simultaneously chilled and moved the witnesses, the lion stood up and took a step in front of Mia, literally placing her between himself and the rest of the world. It was as if he were saying, "No harm will touch you as long as I am here." At that moment, a strange feeling settled in the air. Fear of the animal gave way to admiration, panic transformed into respect. The villagers, usually terrified of lions, understood that this creature, often a symbol of savagery and danger, had just become the protector of an abandoned child. Mia, for her part, looked up at the lion and murmured softly, "Thank you." This simple word, fragile and sincere, seemed to seal their bond. And in this unforgiving savannah, an unexpected act of compassion had given birth to a glimmer of hope. After the incredible encounter with the lion, Mia was safely escorted back to the village. The villagers murmured among themselves, some still amazed, others deeply worried. How could a lion protect an abandoned child like that? But while the little girl regained a semblance of safety, a heavier shadow hung over this miraculous day, the absence of her father. Emily sat down next to Mia, trying to speak to her gently. "Mia, you're safe now. No one will hurt you." The little girl nodded, but her eyes reflected deep confusion and unspeakable sorrow. She needed answers, but most of all, she needed this cruel world to stop abandoning her. Meanwhile, Thomas summoned the village elders to understand why Mia's father had acted this way. It quickly became clear that this man, James Carter, had been consumed by his own debts and personal failures. Unable to face the shame and pressure of his choices, he had believed he could get rid of his daughter, thinking she would survive alone in the savannah. An unthinkable, inhuman act, but one that revealed above all a profound and blind despair. However, while the villagers debated what to do, Mia refused to speak of her father. Her world was one of routines, gestures, and immediate emotions. The past held no interest for her, what mattered was the presence of the animal that had saved her. And this lion, now her faithful companion, never left her side. Every night, he watched over her, every morning, he protected her. This protective behavior soon attracted the attention of local media and scientists. Photographers and biologists arrived to observe this rare phenomenon, a lion that, instead of hunting, chose to protect a vulnerable human. But for Mia, these explanations were secondary. What mattered was that she was no longer alone. And for the first time since her father had abandoned her, she felt genuine warmth in this world that had betrayed her. However, the mystery of her father, the debts that drove him to such acts, and the question of whether or not he would return hung over them like a sword of Damocles. And as Mia drifted off to sleep, nestled against her four-legged protector, the savannah seemed to hold its breath, aware that the story was only just beginning. A few weeks after the incredible rescue, life in the village had begun to return to a calmer pace, but the shadow of James Carter, Mia's father, still loomed large. No one knew exactly where he was or what his intentions were, but his absence had not erased the pain of abandonment. One evening, as the sun set and the savannah filled with golden and red hues, a whisper rippled through the village, "He's back." Mia, sitting near the lion, felt her heart sink. She didn't want to see the man who had left her alone, but a confused and fragile part of her hoped to understand. James appeared at the edge of the village, his face etched with fatigue and remorse. His eyes searched desperately for Mia, but when he caught sight of the lion, a shiver of fear and awe ran through him. The animal stood between him and his daughter, imposing and majestic, like a silent guardian ready to defend what it had saved. "Mia," James murmured, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. The girl remained motionless, observing the man she had never understood. The lion growled softly, a clear and immediate warning. James took a step back, realizing that forgiveness could not be won with words. Emily and Thomas approached, alert, but aware that this moment belonged first and foremost to Mia. The little girl, trembling, took a step forward, but her gaze never left the lion. It was he who gave her courage. And in that shared look, James understood the lesson he would never forget: true love and protection are not measured by strength or fear, but by presence and loyalty. For long minutes, silence reigned. The wind stirred the dust, the sun disappeared behind the horizon, and the lion remained motionless, a living symbol of loyalty and courage. Finally, Mia spoke, her voice soft but firm. "If you want to stay, you must first understand that I am not alone." James lowered his head, overcome with shame and pain, as the lion stared intently at him. For the first time, he understood that his role was no longer that of an immediate protector or decision-maker, but that he had to earn his daughter's trust and respect the unique bond she shared with this king of the savannah. This encounter, charged with tension and emotion, heralded a new stage in Mia's story, a stage where forgiveness, redemption, and the incredible courage of a lion would define the future of the abandoned little girl. In the days that followed, James Carter kept his distance, watching Mia and the lion from the edge of the village. Every gesture from his daughter, every shy smile, reminded him of the enormous mistake he had made. He wanted to approach her, to take her in his arms, to tell her he regretted everything, but the lion's gaze held him back. It was as if the animal could read his soul, and he could not deceive this noble creature. Mia, for her part, had resumed her routines with a newfound sense of security. The lion, whom she had named Kazi, had become her constant companion. In the mornings, he watched over her as she explored the village, and in the evenings, he settled near her cabin, ready to defend her against any danger. His presence calmed her panic attacks, and for the first time since being abandoned, Mia felt truly protected. James, knowing he needed to take action to regain his daughter's trust, decided to show his goodwill through small, concrete actions. He helped repair the village fences, brought food for the inhabitants, and spent hours silently observing Kazi to understand her behavior. But despite his efforts, every time he tried to approach Mia, the lion positioned himself between them, growling softly but firmly. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the savannah, James saw Mia running toward a stream with Kazi at her side. Suddenly, a snake appeared, threatening the little girl. Without hesitation, Kazi leaped forward and drove the snake away, protecting Mia from imminent danger. James, witnessing the scene, felt a powerful emotion wash over him: fear, respect, but above all, admiration. He realized that this lion was not just a protector, he was a silent mentor, showing what it meant to watch over someone with loyalty and courage. That evening, James sat by the fire, reflecting on his life and his choices. He understood that to win back his daughter, he had to not only prove his sincerity, but also accept that Mia now had another kind of family, embodied by Kazi. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but he was ready to walk it. And as the savannah fell asleep, Mia leaned against Kazi, her gaze fixed on the starry sky, unaware that her father had begun the arduous journey to reclaim his place by her side. The scene, tender and moving, hinted that bonds stronger than fear and abandonment were being forged. The calm of the village was abruptly interrupted by a distant rumble. The inhabitants, accustomed to the relative tranquility of the savannah, froze. The sounds of breaking branches and hooves pounding the ground announced the arrival of imminent danger, a group of armed poachers, come to capture the region's lions to sell them. Mia, playing near the stream with Kazi, immediately sensed that something was wrong. Kazi's fur bristled, and a powerful roar rang out, warning intruders of his presence. The little girl retreated, hiding behind the lion, as danger rapidly drew closer. Alerted by the commotion, James rushed over and was horrified by the scene. He understood that this moment was crucial. If he truly wanted to redeem himself in his daughter's eyes, he had to act without hesitation. Armed only with his courage, he placed himself between Kazi and the poachers, shouting to deter them. But the men were determined and were approaching with nets and rifles. Kazi leaped forward, roaring with a power that made the poachers stumble back a step. Mia, trembling, squeezed her father's hand. For the first time in weeks, their hands touched without fear, a fragile contact, yet one filled with hope. James felt the full weight of his responsibility as a father. Protecting his daughter would never be easy, but he had to learn to act with courage and loyalty, like Kazi. The silent battle between the lion and the poachers lasted only a few minutes, but seemed like an eternity to the villagers. Kazi, with his strength and intelligence, managed to disorient the men, giving James time to intervene and drive them back. Finally, the poachers, frightened by Kazi's determination and James's courage, fled into the savannah, leaving the village safe. After this ordeal, James knelt before Mia and Kazi, exhausted but grateful. I understand now," he murmured, his voice trembling. "I must be worthy of your trust, and Kazi's." Mia, moved but confident, smiled for the first time since the abandonment. The bond between her and her father was beginning to rebuild, but it was clear that the real lesson came from the lion: courage, loyalty, and protection are not given, they are earned. And as night fell on the savannah, an almost supernatural calm settled over it. The girl, the father, and the lion, an unlikely trio, were now bound together by an experience that no one else could have understood, but which would transform them forever. The weeks following the conflict with the poachers were a mixture of calm and tension. Mia and Kazi spent every moment together, exploring the savannah and discovering secret places where only the little girls seemed able to venture. James, meanwhile, had to learn to navigate this new world, understanding his daughter's needs, respecting her routines, and above all, gaining Kazi's trust, who never took her eyes off her charge. One morning, as the sun rose in a rosy sky, James gently approached Mia. "Good morning, Mia," he said, his voice low and hesitant. The little girl looked up, wary, but didn't back away. Kazi had lain down beside her, watching his father intently. James held out a small, trembling hand, holding a flower he had picked in the savannah. "For you," he murmured. Intrigued, Mia studied the flower for a few seconds before gently taking it. This simple, almost insignificant gesture nevertheless marked a turning point. The little girl was beginning to accept that her father could change. In the days that followed, they established a new routine. Each morning, James followed Mia and Kazi on their explorations, learning to understand the lion's silent language, its signals and warnings. Every step forward, every smile from Mia, was a victory for James, a reminder that forgiveness was possible but fragile. But this rebuilding was far from easy. Mia, hurt by the abandonment, had moments of reluctance, and Kazi, though protective, constantly tested James's intentions. One afternoon, as they were walking through a small wood, James tripped and fell, and Kazi immediately roared, placing him between himself and Mia. This moment of instinctive protection made James understand the importance of every gesture, every decision. He had to earn their trust at every moment. As dusk fell, sitting around the fire with Mia nestled against Kazi, James whispered, "I promise never to leave you alone again." The little girl silently placed her hand on her father's. It was a small gesture, but heavy with meaning. The fragile bond between them had just begun, cemented by the courage and loyalty of an extraordinary lion. And as the stars lit up above the savannah, a new feeling washed over James: hope. For the first time in a long time, he believed in a future where his daughter would be protected, loved, and, above all, never abandoned again. A few months had passed since James had begun rebuilding trust with Mia and Kazi. The trio seemed close, but the beautiful and unforgiving savannah still held surprises. One afternoon, while Mia was picking wildflowers near a small stream, a low rumble echoed from the edge of the forest. This time, it wasn't poachers. A pack of hungry hyenas, drawn by the lion's presence and the scent of food Mia was carrying, was circling them. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the sunlight, and the predator's raucous laughter made even the bravest tremble. Mia instinctively backed away, and Kazi positioned himself in front of her, muscles tensed and fangs bared. Danger was imminent. Sensing the urgency, James tried to calm the situation by speaking softly, "Mia, stay behind me." But the lion growled, warning him not to get in the way. James understood that he had to be calm and strategic to protect his daughter, just like a true parent would. The pack approached, but Kazi, imposing and agile, used his presence to create a protective barrier. His powerful roars echoed throughout the clearing, intimidating the hyenas. James, inspired by the lion's courage, positioned himself beside Mia, forming a human-animal wall. Together, they managed to keep the pack at bay, the tension mounting with each passing second. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the hyenas, frightened by the trio's coordination and determination, retreated and disappeared into the savannah. Mia, trembling but safe and sound, clung to Kazi, while James finally breathed a sigh of relief. This episode marked a turning point. Mia understood that her father could now be a trustworthy protector, but above all, James realized that true strength did not come only from him, but from their three-way bond: a daughter, a father, and a lion, united by loyalty, courage, and love. And as the sun set, painting the savannah in shades of orange and purple, James made a silent promise to always protect Mia, no matter what dangers might come. Kazi, sitting beside them, seemed to agree, a living symbol of absolute trust and protection. The relative calm that followed the hyena attack was short-lived. One morning, while Mia and Kazi were exploring a flowery clearing, James received an unexpected letter. An old creditor, refusing any compromise, threatened to seize the family's property if the debt wasn't settled immediately. The brutal return of the past plunged James into a mixture of fear and guilt. Mia, too young to understand the details, nevertheless sensed the tension building around them. She instinctively clung to Kazi, sensing that something serious was about to happen. The lion, as always, perceived danger before anyone else. His golden eyes scanned the horizon, his ears pricked, and his body ready to intervene. James knew he had to protect his daughter from a double threat: the outside world and the mistakes he had made in the past. The letter was clear: he had to act quickly or risk losing everything he had rebuilt. But this time, he wasn't alone. Kazi stood by his side, and Mia, despite her fear, offered him quiet strength and unwavering motivation. With the help of the village and a few close friends, James set out to negotiate with the creditors. Each meeting was a test of patience, courage, and cunning. But whenever he doubted himself, Kazi's protective gaze and Mia's reassuring presence reminded him why he had to succeed. For the first time, he understood that his redemption wasn't just about words or apologies; it required concrete actions, an unwavering commitment to those he loved. One evening, after a long day of negotiations and stress, James returned to the village. He found Mia asleep by the fire, Kazi lying beside her, still watching over her. The relief was immense. Despite the threats, despite the ghosts of the past, they were together, stronger than ever. This chapter of their lives taught James a profound truth: courage lies not only in physical protection, but in perseverance in the face of adversity, loyalty to those one loves, and the ability to confront one's mistakes in order to build a better future. And as night enveloped the savannah, the unlikely trio, a girl, her father, and a lion, prepared to face together the final obstacles that would stand in their way, united by an unbreakable bond and unwavering mutual trust. The following weeks finally brought a semblance of normalcy to Mia and her father's lives. James's debts were largely resolved, thanks to his tireless efforts and the help of the villagers. But the unpredictable and wild savannah still held its challenges. One afternoon, while Mia was playing near the stream with Kazi, a fire broke out at the edge of the forest, caused by lightning and dry wind. The flames spread rapidly, threatening the village and, above all, the little girl. The danger was real and imminent. Kazi immediately positioned himself in front of Mia, roaring to warn her and intimidate any potential predators who might take advantage of the chaos. James, sensing his daughter's panic and the lion's determination, ran to their side. But the fire was advancing too quickly. The only possible way out was to cross a small, fragile bridge over a raging river. As they were about to cross the bridge, a sinister creak rang out. A plank gave way beneath Mia's feet, sending her tumbling into the raging water. Without hesitation, Kazi leaped forward, grabbing the girl by her jacket with impressive precision and strength. James stretched out his arms and managed to catch her, but the bridge still threatened to collapse. In a final heroic effort, Kazi guided James and Mia to the other side, then turned back to ensure that no villagers or animals were in danger. The lion, exhausted but invincible in his loyalty, finally moved away from the fire zone, showing that his courage knew no bounds. Once safe, Mia threw herself into her father's arms, trembling but happy. James, holding her tightly, whispered, "I'll never let you down again." Never. Mia's gaze turned to Kazi, and in her eyes shone a silent but boundless gratitude. The villagers, witnesses to this act of bravery, were deeply moved. They understood that the bond between Mia, her father, and the lion went far beyond simple protection. It symbolized redemption, loyalty, and the strength of unconditional love. That day, the entire savannah seemed to hold its breath, admiring an unlikely trio united by unbreakable bonds. Mia had found a protector in Kazi, a trustworthy father in James, and an inner strength that no hardship could ever break. And as the sun set over the blazing savannah, one certainty dawned on everyone: sometimes, heroes are not those we expect, but those who appear when the world seems most cruel, ready to love, protect, and inspire forever.